Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bill Roach. This is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. And today, what we're going to look at are what I consider to be some of the best books for people trying to get into philosophy, namely beginners or introductory books. Now, before we dive into that, I kind of want to just talk about a few other things to help set the stage for this. So, I just got home tonight recently from taking a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. I've been a person who's practiced martial arts for several years. Now I've been really just focusing in on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And because it's the new year, we have a lot of new students. We have a lot of new people coming in. And it's interesting because most of them feel like, oh, I don't know what's going on. They feel like they're drowning in this ocean of new material and different ideas and different workouts, and they're getting smashed by smaller people. And I was telling somebody tonight, I was like, just hold on, calm down, you'll be fine. It's little by little. We strive day by day, we set our goals, we work towards the goals, and then within 6 months, you realize very quickly you can do a lot more jujitsu than you would ever imagine. And I think it's not just jujitsu where we face this. I think it's like that if we're going to practice music or if we're going to take up any specific sort of hobby or activity that requires a lot of work and a lot of precise work in order to get a lot better at it. And the reason I say that is that there are a lot of people who come up to me and they want to learn philosophy because, Bill, you're the head of a PhD program in philosophy of religion. You have a PhD in philosophy, and then they get immediately intimidated. And it's interesting because, there's a parallel between somebody approaching, they're like, oh, Bill, you're a black belt in karate. And, what's it like? And what am I supposed to do? And you study philosophy. And the reason that I think people get intimidated with both is that they don't know where to start. And that's why I want to make a video like this, is that some people have said, we like some of your videos, but we want to find a good introductory place for this. And that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to lay a good foundation for a lot of people. And from there, and as the audience grows and builds, we are going to continue to make sort of higher level philosophy videos, but we got to start somewhere. So that said, if you like these videos, and I think a lot of you have been, will you please like and subscribe? I've actually seen a lot of growth, and it's been in growth of areas of beginner philosophy and books that I'm recommending. So again, if you like this channel and you want to see more videos like this, it helps me sort of with my metrics, please subscribe to this video. It helps me out significantly. So with no further ado, what I want to do is go through and talk about what are my favorite beginner philosophy books. And I'm going to save my favorite one for last. And the reason that I'm going to save it for last is because, well, one, I want you to listen to the whole video, but two, it's probably the one that changed my life the most. And ironically, it was probably the first philosophy book that I ever read, but it was the most influential philosophy book for me and really for hundreds of thousands of people. But the first philosophy book that I want to recommend is really where philosophy started. Namely, it starts with Socrates, who is sort of this figure that we know. He was the teacher of Plato. He represents sort of philosophy in its highest form, in the sense, in its beginning form. And from there, you see the Greek philosophers find their origin, and you really see just philosophy takes off. Now, it has been said that philosophy is nothing more than a series of footnotes on Plato. True. But who was Plato's main character? Socrates. So in another sense, we could say, the history of Western philosophy is nothing more than a series of Plato's footnotes on Socrates, his teacher. So my favorite book is actually titled here, Philosophy 101 by Socrates, an introduction to philosophy via Plato's Apology. And it's by Peter Kraft. And I know a lot of people probably think, oh, Bill, you recommend a lot of Peter Kraft. And I do, because Peter Kraft is probably better than any figure that I've seen to take these high philosophical issues and relate them to the common man. And that's what philosophy is striving to do. Philosophy is not just about this abstract, meaningless, lifeless, mathematical sort of approach to figuring out odd questions. What is a philosopher? It's a lover of wisdom. It's a person who is pursuing wisdom, trying to live out wisdom, trying to find out what is the good life. How do I know what the good life is? How do I live out this good life? And what you'll find in this book is that Kraft is going to lay out with literally philosophy's best philosopher in his apology, where he's giving his defense as a philosopher for why Socrates was doing the great things that he was doing in order to substantiate himself as somebody who's pursuing truth. Now, doesn't that sound like something you want to get involved in? Somebody who's willing to be committed to truth, find truth, question each word of truth. Why? Because truth matters. Ideas have consequences. And ultimately, Socrates paid for it with his life. Now, what's unique about this particular book is that it's going to go through and it's going to give you what he calls 40 different sayings or 40 different things that philosophers need to know in order to be a good philosopher. And let me read just a few of these here. It says, you need to be, in order to be a good philosopher, 40 things philosophy is. One, it's ignorant. Namely, it knows that it doesn't know. It's selfish. It's ironic. Plain. It's misunderstood. It's a failure. It's poor. As the old joke goes, what's the difference between a philosopher and a pizza? At least a pizza can feed a family of 4. It's unscientific. In one sense, it's pre-modernity in one sense, but yet it's perennial. It reaches all eras at all times and all places. And there's so many other things that he's going to get at here. It's therapeutic. It's embarrassing sometimes. It's virtuous. And the reason that I like this is that Kreeft really takes philosophy and he turns it on its head. And I think a lot of times people don't like philosophy because it comes across as people asking these abstract questions that feel irrelevant to one's life. And, you know, one of the things that I just want to look at here, just a very brief little portion here, is this idea philosophy is ignorant. And you're like, well, I thought philosophers claim to know things. I just want to read a small section of it here. Kreeft says, the first words of the first sentence in Greek are, I do not know. This is the hidden key to the central meaning of the dialogue. Plato usually gives the reader such a clue to help him and hides it to test him. For example, the first words of the Republic, I went down to Piraeus, signals Plato's descent into the cave of politics. The first words of the Meno, can you tell me, Socrates, signals the point of the dialogue as the Socratic method of teaching by questioning, not telling. The first words of the Phaedo are, or this, were you there with Socrates? Ask the reader to identify with Socrates' life and death. Socrates dies in the Phaedo, somewhat as a Christian does with Christ. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there? The first words of the Euthyphro, this is Socrates, is something new, signals the fact that Socrates represents a fundamentally new kind of religion and piety that the old one, represented by the Euthyphro, cannot comprehend. So the point that he's trying to look at here is that the philosopher is somebody who doesn't claim to have exhaustive knowledge. In fact, one of the best things in life is to know that sometimes you just don't know. We're in the pursuit of truth. But then he finishes that book off with a great introduction to the apology. So you're getting some of these key 40 major topics on philosophy through clear sentence propositional things and the best intro book on philosophy, namely the apology itself. That is my favorite introduction to philosophy, but it wasn't the most life-changing one. Now, the second one that I recommend is one titled An Introduction to Philosophy, Life's Ultimate Questions, or it could be Life's Ultimate Questions, An Introduction to Philosophy by Ronald Nash. Now, Ronald Nash has passed away, and he got his PhD from Syracuse University, and he was a professor at several different institutions. I think he was at Western Kentucky for a long time, but he also taught at Reformed Theological Seminary and the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And some people might scoff and say, oh, that's just religiously biased. Well, atheism is a form of religion. Agnosticism acts and functions like a form of religion today. And the reality is that philosophers of religion were probably some of the most influential figures of the 20th century. In fact, they changed so much of the history of philosophy during that time that we have to listen to what they have to say. Now, he wrote this book as an introduction to philosophy, and some of the topics that he looks at here is really his whole idea of life's ultimate questions. But what I like about this book is that it combines two things in particular. It gives us a historical approach, and it's going to give us a good topical or approach where it's going to look at different problems in philosophy. Now, he grounds it in what's known as his worldview thinking. And in that sense, he's pulling from his embrace of Reformed epistemology He's going to look at worldview studies in their classic sense. And he looks at what he considers 6 conceptual systems: naturalism, Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Augustine, and Aquinas. Now, in many respects, if you know anything about Ronald Nash, he's Augustinian, he's going to follow Calvin, but ultimately he's going to be a form of inductive presuppositionalism, but he's also going to buy into the Reformed epistemology camp. Now, what I really like about this book is the way that he approaches the topics. They're the big topics. He's going to look at the role of logic, namely the law of non-contradiction. He's going to look at this real big issue within philosophy called possible worlds. And possible worlds are trying to deal with these issues of contingent truths. In a possible world, I could not be making this video, or in a possible world, you could be making this video. And how do we relate to those sort of modalities of truth where there's not this pure necessity on something, but possibility of something? In addition to this, he's going to look at issues of epistemology, whatever happened to truth, a tale of two systems, and then he's going to dive into his defense of Reformed epistemology. Now, excuse me, he also is going to look into the nature of God and the existence of God. 2 key questions: is he there, and what is he like? Is God a being that exists? And if he is a being that exists, what is his nature? He also looks at some of the issues of metaphysics. He narrows it to the issue of determinism versus indeterminism. And he's going to look at issues of ethics. And he's going to finish with human nature, the mind-body problem, and the problem of survival after death. And the reason that I like this book is that it's a clear text. He doesn't set the bar too high. He offers good sort of discussion/essay questions. And the reason that's important is that you're getting into philosophy and you need to have a good lay of the land. And the reason that it's good is because he gives you a few good historical figures, so you have some people to work with and some good topics to work with. But the questions themselves in the book is very important because now you know some of the issues or how to approach the issues. And here's one thing to consider is that when you're studying philosophy, it's not always the answer that you give. Sometimes it's the questions that you raise. And one of the best ways to study philosophy is to look at good philosophers and see what kind of questions they're asking. Because sometimes maybe you're close to the issue, but you haven't gotten specifically to the issue. And a good philosopher is somebody who tries to get to the very core of an issue. And the best way to learn it is to look at the best philosophers, namely the figures he looks at: Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Plotinus, Aquinas, and so on and so forth, at the big issues of our day. And that's a good introduction to philosophy for the fact that it brings historical and topical issues at a true introductory level, and it asks good questions. Now, my third favorite one, if the best philosophy book to start out with is The Apology, you also have to see that probably one of the best philosophy books ever is The Republic. But the problem with The Republic is that it has been somewhat misinterpreted. Sometimes we just narrowly miss the point. And I don't want to give the point away. I want you to actually read this book as a good introduction to philosophy by one of the key texts in the history of philosophy, namely Plato's Republic. But I want you to do so with a book titled A Socratic Introduction to Plato's Republic by, again, Peter Kreeft. Peter Kreeft is probably my favorite living philosopher today. And the reason is because, again, like I said, Kreeft brings these key issues down to the average person in a profound way. Now, what I like about this book, and again, I just look at the table of contents, is that he starts out by giving you a clear understanding of why we need to start philosophy with Plato, an understanding of the historical approach to philosophy. Because again, Alfred North Whitehead said, the history of philosophy, Western philosophy in particular, is nothing more than a series of footnotes on Plato. So even people who say, no, you must base your philosophy in the Bible, well, that's a footnote on Plato. So again, you're either appropriating, responding to, adding to, some way subtracting from, modifying Plato in some certain respect. And I'm not going to say that biblical revelation plays no part in that. But by saying that biblical revelation plays a part in that, it's a series of footnotes on Plato. And I think that's where Christian philosophy takes good aspects in Plato and shows how revelation either corrects it or goes above and beyond what Plato taught us. But what he's going to do is he's going to give you a clear outline of Plato's Republic. And the reason that's important is it's a map. It's one of those things where it's going to get you from the beginning to the end. And that's one thing that I like. If I'm going to go on a trip, I like to have a map of where I'm going. And I don't want to just see the little small details. I want the full picture. I want to know, how am I going to get from the beginning to the end, from point A to point B? And that's specifically what he's going to do in this book. Is he's going to give you probably the best introduction that's going to be right where you're at, defining all of his terms, illustrating his points, pulling the key issues out of Plato's Republic so that you can then go read Plato's Republic. It's an introduction to Plato's probably best book on philosophy, namely the Republic itself. So here's one reason I kind of want to give you a mini defense of the Republic before you even dive into the topic. You know, we'll sit there and people will ask questions like, man, you know, if I were in politics, here's how I would fix society. And, you know, you could say, well, how many teachers should we have? How much should we pay those teachers? Should we have politicians? If so, should it be a king? Should it be some kind of republic? Should it be a pure democracy? And, you know, should we have musicians? Should we have art? Should we vote? Should we not vote? And when people are responding to those types of questions, you're doing precisely what Plato was doing in the Republic. You're trying to establish what is a good society. How do we make good citizens in that society? But Plato goes one step further. Namely, the society is really a mirror of you. You're not just trying to order society, you're trying to order yourself. And by asking those types of questions, you're asking, well, should reason be predominant? Should it be the ruling thing? What role do the passions have in our lives? Should we have them warring against one another? Should reason rule the passions? Should the passions rule reason? And so on and so forth and so much more. But the point is that Plato's Republic is a picture of not just how to make society, it's about how to make you. So in that regard, it's not just some esoteric thing. It's literally trying to better your life. Because again, what is philosophy? Is it some guy with a couple hairs hanging off of his chin, drinking, you know, soy lattes near some university campus, just like some freak? No, it's the love of wisdom. It's trying to help you live the true life of the philosopher, pursuing the true, the good, and the beautiful. Now, moving on, I want to go to what I considered a good introduction to philosophy book. It's a bit dated, but it's not a bad introduction to philosophy book, because if it's true, there really is no sort of clock on it. But some of the issues that he's going to look at are the perennial issues of philosophy, but it needs to be coupled with a couple other ones. And the reason I say that is that before I tell you what it is, this book was published in 1980. You know, we're in 2023. So this book is what, 43 years old now, right in there. Forgive my math. We'll see if you catch that. But what he does here is it's a book titled An Introduction to Philosophy, A Christian Perspective by Norman Geisler and Paul Feinberg. And, you know, at the time, Paul Feinberg was a professor at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And Geisler used to teach at Trinity, and then he taught at Dallas, and then he taught at Liberty, and then he founded Southern Evangelical Seminary and Veritas International University. Both of them are fine philosophers here. And Geisler was probably the most influential Christian apologist of the really the 20th and early 21st centuries. And in that sense, he was probably the most prolific author, one of the most prolific debaters, co-founded 2 institutions, and wrote some of the most pivotal texts in the history of philosophy. In fact, I wrote a whole book on Norman Geisler titled Defending Evangelicalism. Dr. Geisler was a mentor of mine. He was very pivotal in my life. I'm very thankful for his work, and I'm very thankful for this book. Now, what this book does is it really dives into some of the key issues in philosophy. It's going to give you what is philosophy, key issues to philosophy, and it looks at it in different parts. So it's going to give sort of an introduction to the introduction. It's going to look at what is knowledge. It's going to look at what is reality, what is the ultimate, and what is good or right. So in this respect, it's going to look at issues of epistemology. It's going to ask questions such as, can we know? How can we know? Is certainty possible? How do we perceive the external world? How are beliefs justified? It's going to look at issues of reality, which is of metaphysics, the reality of the one and the many, the relationship between the mind and body. Is man free? Does man survive death? Are there other minds? What is truth? It's going to look at what is ultimate. This is going to be the issues of faith and reason. What do we mean by God? Does God exist? How can we even talk about God? The problem of evil. Can we experience God? But then it finishes here with a whole topic on the issue of ethics. What is the good life? Or what is good or what is right? It's going to ask questions like, what is right? How do we know what is right? The relationship between rules and results. Is the right universal, and do moral duties ever conflict? So again, that's a good introduction to philosophy, a bit dated, could be coupled with some of the others, but it's a great one to start out with because it's going to give you a good survey of the key issues of philosophy. Now, I want to give you my last two here, and for an introduction to philosophy, I keep saying these are all my favorites because they are my favorites. This one here is titled An Introduction to Philosophy, The Perennial Principles of the Classical Realist Tradition by Daniel Sullivan. And what this book does is it gives probably, in my opinion, the best introduction to classical realist philosophy ever in print. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at philosophy asking, what is philosophy? And it's going to give the historical rise of philosophy. It gives one of the best introductions to the classical realist perspective coming out of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. And what he's going to then do is he's going to look at the meaning of man, and it's going to give things such as the nature of man, the nature of knowing, the kinds of knowing, the truth of knowing, the nature of desire, freedom and liberty, liberty and love, the soul of man, human personality. It's going to look at the making of man. What is the role of virtue and ethics and becoming this virtuous lover of wisdom? It's going to look at the universe of man, namely, how does the external world exist and the universal acts of being, the quest of being, the transcendentals of being, the divisions of being, uncreated being, and this concept of perennial philosophy, a philosophy that is common sense, it is truly scientific, it's ordering of all the different branches, and so on and so forth. This book is a gem for understanding the perennial philosophy of the classical realist tradition, which is my tradition. I am of that sort of Aristotelian Thomistic perspective. In many respects, it's still a footnote on Plato. In one sense, it's even Platonic, because you're going to look at it. What's the biggest difference between Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, and Aquinas? They all affirmed a real world of the forms, but they gave them new postal addresses. Plato put them in the external world, in this ideal realm. Aristotle put them in this realm. Namely, that's why when you look at the School of Athens picture, Plato is pointing up, Aristotle's pointing out with division because they're all in multiple different things. But what Augustine and Aquinas did is they put forms rightly where they should be, in the mind of God. But they also put them in created things, because the act of creation is God taking the forms, namely exemplary causes, and manifesting them into the material world by creating the material world. In fact, creation ex nihilo, but you see the mind of God displayed in creation. But there's so much more. I think it's probably the most coherent philosophy. And in this sense, I think in order to move forward, we got to move back. We got to deny sort of the critical turn in modern philosophy. But with that said, I want to give you what has become the most influential book for me in my study of philosophy. And the reason is that it was the first book that connected all the dots for me, answered so many of the questions that I had. I was a person who was not raised as a Christian, not raised in a Christian family, would have considered myself an atheist at one point in time, some kind of materialist atheist. And I remember reading Romans chapter 1, saying that from creation, I can know there is a creator and the divine attributes. And I remember thinking, I would walk around or I would look and I'd be like, man, every created thing I see manifests that God is there. From creation, I know there's a creator. Everything is pointing to the creator. And I couldn't get away from it. God used that to grasp my mind and to prick my conscience. And then it was through the preaching of the gospel that I finally came to faith in Christ. But the book that I'm going to look at here was one that really set my foundation by looking at how did we get here, who is God, and what are all the key issues. And the title of it is The God Who Is There by Francis Schaeffer. Now, I don't have the original one. I actually bought the multi-volume series here by Francis Schaeffer. And The God Who Is There is probably the most influential book that I have read, for the simple fact, and I'm going to pull it up here for the table of contents, is that it's going to look at this great gulf in his line of despair. Namely, what happens when we're studying philosophy or ideas and we buy into these ideas and the effects of those ideas start to get implemented into our lives and into society? Is there kind of a point of no return? Is there an idea that's like a cliff that if you fall off of it, there's no coming back? And in one sense, there really is. There are ideas that are out there that are so damning to the human soul and to the concept of truth and to reality itself, namely the issue that we are confronted with modernity. And modernity in and of itself has some great truths with it, but there are aspects of modernity that fundamentally undercut our ability to know reality, to know true truth, and to live with some kind of meaningful and coherent way in this world. For example, you'll have people that'll say there is no truth and all ethics is nothing but relative. And you go to a coffee shop and you're walking out and somebody robs your wallet. They take it from you. They pickpocket you. You can't catch the guy. They're gone. They're out of there. So you call the police because you know that you've been wrong, truly been wronged, but you don't believe in truth and you don't believe in ethical absolutes. But at that moment, the money that you had in your wallet really adds up to the number that corresponded in your wallet. Namely, if you say you had $50, well, you're going to say the guy stole $50 from me. You're not going to be, well, it was $5 in my appearance. No, it was $50. In addition, you're going to know that something was really morally wrong done to you, or something wrong was really done to you in that sense. So in order to live in a coherent way, you're actually undoing the philosophy that you're buying into. And what he argues for here is that we as Christians need to see that there are different steps to this line of despair. It comes through things such as philosophy, first and foremost. It starts in the realm of ideas, and then it works its way into culture in a variety of different ways. And he shows this with several philosophers and what these ideas have done. But then he looks at how it affects art, and he's going to look at music, and he's going to look at what it did to society in and of itself. He's going to look at what it did to theology and what it's done in so many different respects to different understandings of what is true religion, and in particular, what is true Christianity, and what is this concept of true truth. And ultimately, he's going to argue for this notion that there is a God, and there is a God who is there, and we can not just fall prey to the line of despair, but through the work of Jesus Christ and the mind of God revealed in the scriptures, manifesting itself in Jesus Christ, there is redemption from vain, false ideas. So here's what we have to see is that if we consider Socrates to be the greatest philosopher because he was a lover of wisdom, he still falls short. We need to be somebody who sees wisdom incarnate. Namely, the best philosopher ever is the revealed word of God, wisdom incarnate, Jesus Christ, who redeems us, renews our mind, and gives us the ability to live in God's world according to God's ways, which is by turning from our sins and faith and repentance in Jesus Christ. He died on the cross for us. He took our place so that our sins were placed on him and his righteousness is placed on us. So what I'm trying to see here is that Schaeffer gives us something more than, oh, we just need to have esoteric philosophical approaches to these philosophical questions. No, they make all the difference in your life. And there are some things that are so foolish that only a PhD in philosophy will buy into. But the reality is that there's a lot of PhDs in philosophy and theology and the arts and all these things that are so lost, even though they have the qualifications. Because what is the philosopher? It's the person who doesn't just pursue wisdom or seek wisdom. He's a lover of wisdom. And truth starts out, in our pursuit of truth, is like an open mouth in this sense. An open mind is like an open mouth in this regard. An open mouth stays open until it finds something solid to bite into. And that's how your mind should be. It should be open until something solid comes into it, namely true truth, the reality of truth, the reality of divine propositional revelation. When you find it, lock onto it. Stop the endless skeptical pursuit. That's what Schaeffer calls us to do. That's why it was so influential in my life. The buck stops here. You have to live in this world. This endless pursuit of meaninglessness will get you nowhere. Now, let me finish with this. So I was saying that I was coming from jiu-jitsu class, and I find it interesting that I've had a lot of people, usually young men, who come up to me and they're like, hey, I've been reading Sartre lately, or I've been reading Camus, or I've been reading Nietzsche. They're reading all these like existentialists and these atheistic philosophers, but then they're like, oh, I'm dying on the inside. I don't know what to do. And my first response to them is, quit reading those guys. That's what they're trying to get you to do. And the reason I say that is that we need to be somebody who's pursuing truth. And if you're a person who's locked into that, please set those books aside. Just trust me for a moment. Read some of these others. Start with Schaeffer's The God Who Is There, and then look at some of the other books. So again, my name is Bill Roach. I am a PhD philosophy. I'm hoping that these videos help you. I'm also the director of a PhD program in philosophy. And if you found this video helpful, please subscribe. It helps me know what you like, and it helps me continue to make more videos like this for you. Again, this is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. In fact, why do we call it Timeless Dialogues? Because I'm picking up on Plato's concept of the dialogues, and they're timeless. These are conversations that people are going to be having today, tomorrow, and forever. Thank you.